The Sayings of Confucius. These are not ideas, they are standards. Listen carefully, reflect deeply. The subject is your character.
The master said, "To learn and to practice on occasion what one has learnt, is this not true pleasure? The coming of a friend from a far-off land, is this not true joy? Make conscientiousness and sincerity your grand object. Have no friends not equal to yourself. If you have done wrong, be not ashamed to make amends. Observe the bent of a man's will when his father is alive, and his actions after his father is dead. If during the 3 years of mourning he does not swerve from his father's principles, he may be pronounced a truly filial son. The odes are 300 in number, but their purport may be summed up in a word. Have no depraved thoughts. Observe a man's actions. Scrutinize his motives. Take note of the things that give him pleasure. How then can he hide from you what he really is? Acquire new knowledge whilst thinking over the old, and you may become a teacher of others. The higher type of man is not like a vessel which is designed for some special use. Study without thought is vain. Thought without study is perilous. Absorption in the study of the supernatural is most harmful. Shall I tell you what true knowledge is? When you know, to know that you know, and when you do not know, to know that you do not know. That is true knowledge. Tzu Chang was studying with a view to official preferment. The master said to him, "Among the various things you hear said, reserve your judgment on those which seem doubtful, and give cautious utterance to the rest. Then you will seldom fall into error. Among the various things you see done, set aside those which seem dangerous, and cautiously put the others into practice. Then you will seldom have occasion for repentance. If you seldom err in your speech, and seldom have to repent of your actions, official preferment will come of itself." The master said, "I do not see how a man without sincerity can be good for anything. How can a cart or carriage be made to go without yoke or crossbar? To sacrifice to a spirit with which you have nothing to do is mere servility. To shirk your duty when you see it before you shows want of moral courage." Someone inquired as to the meaning of the great sacrifice. The master said, "I do not know. He who knew its meaning would find it as easy to govern the empire as to look upon this," pointing to his palm. Wang Sun-chia asked, saying, "What means the adage, 'Better be civil to the kitchen god than to the god of the inner sanctum'?" The master replied, "The adage is false. He who sins against heaven can rely on the intercession of none." The master said, "He who serves his prince with all the proper ceremony will be accounted by men a flatterer. It is bootless to discuss accomplished facts, to protest against things past remedy, to find fault with things bygone. How am I to regard one who has rank without liberality, who performs ceremonies without reverence, who approaches the rites of mourning without sorrow? Men's faults are characteristic. It is by observing a man's faults that one may come to know his virtues. Having heard the true way in the morning, what matters it if one should come to die at night? The scholar who is bent on studying the principles of virtue, yet is ashamed of bad clothes and coarse food, is not yet fit to receive instruction. Instead of being concerned that you have no office, be concerned to think how you may fit yourself for office. Instead of being concerned that you are not known, seek to be worthy of being known. When you see a good man, think of emulating him. When you see a bad man, examine your own heart. The ancients hesitated to give their thoughts utterance. They were afraid that their actions might not be equal to their words. Few are those who err on the side of self-restraint. Virtue cannot live in solitude. Neighbours are sure to grow up around it. Chi Wen-tzu used to reflect thrice before he acted. When told of this, the master said, Twice would do. The master said, Alas, I have never met a man who could see his own faults and arraign himself at the bar of his own conscience. Tzu Hua, having been sent on a mission to the Qi state, Jian Qiu begged for a gift of grain for his mother. The master said, Give her a peck. The disciple asking for more, he said, Give her then a bushel. But Jian Qiu eventually gave her as much as 500 weight of grain. Then the master rebuked him, saying, When Qi went to the Qi state, he was conveyed by a team of sleek horses and was wearing costly fur garments. Now I have heard that the princely man succours the distressed, but will not add to the opulence of the wealthy. Yuan Su, having been made governor of a district, was presented with 900 measures of grain. He declined them. The master said, Do not decline them. May they not be distributed among the villages and townships of your neighborhood. The master said, Who can go out of a house except by the door? In life, why not pass likewise through the door of virtue? You may speak of higher subjects to those who rise above the average level of mankind, but not to those who fall below it. With coarse food to eat, water to drink, and the bended arm as a pillow, happiness may still exist. Wealth and rank unrighteously obtained seem to me as insubstantial as floating clouds. The inhabitants of Huxiang were unconversable people, and when a young man from those parts came to see Confucius, the disciples hesitated to let him in. But the master said, When a man comes to me, I accept him at his best, not at his worst. Why make so much ado? When a man washes his hands before paying a visit, and you receive him in that clean state, you do not thereby stand surety for his always having been clean in the past. The master said, Is virtue then so remoter? I have only to show a desire for virtue, and lo, it is here. The master said, Prodigality begets arrogance, parsimony begets niggardliness. But it is better to be niggardly than arrogant. Without due self-restraint, courtesy becomes oppressive. Prudence degenerates into timidity, valor into violence, and candor into rudeness. Love of daring and dread of poverty lead to sedition. The man without natural virtue, if pursued by the hatred of society, will become a desperado. If a man is proud and avaricious, though his other qualities may embrace all that was fine in the character of Cho Kung, they are not worth taking into account. It is not easy to find a man who after 3 years of self-cultivation has not reached happiness. He who is out of office should not meddle in the government. Hot-headedness without honesty, ignorance without ingenuousness, simplicity without sincerity. Such characters I do not understand. Pursue the study of virtue as though you could never reach your goal, and were afraid of losing the ground already gained. The master said, I have not met one whose love of virtue was equal to his love of sensual beauty. Though in making a mound I should stop, when but one more basketful of earth would complete it, the fact remains that I have stopped. On the other hand, if in levelling it to the ground I advance my work by but one basketful at a time, the fact remains that I am advancing. Alas, there are sprouting crops which never come into ear. There are others which, having come into ear, never ripen into grain. We ought to have a wholesome respect for our juniors. Who knows but that by and by they may prove themselves equal to the men of today. It is only when they reach the age of 40 or 50, without distinguishing themselves, that we need no longer be afraid of them. Words of just admonition cannot fail to command a ready assent. But practical reformation is the thing that really matters. Words of kindly advice cannot fail to please the listener. But subsequent meditation on them is the thing that really matters. I can make nothing of the man who is pleased with advice, but will not meditate on it, who assents to admonition, but does not reform. A great army may be robbed of its leader, but nothing can rob one poor man of his will. It is only when the cold season comes that we know the pine and cypress to be evergreens. Let a pupil join with you in self-cultivation before you let him approach the general truths of philosophy. But let him approach these general truths before he is allowed to form his character for good. He should have formed his character for good before he is allowed to make exceptions to a general rule. When Yen Yuan died, the master said, "Alas, God has forsaken me. God has forsaken me." On the death of Yen Yuan, the disciples wanted to give him a sumptuous funeral, but the master said, "Better not." Nevertheless, the disciples did give him a sumptuous funeral, whereupon the master said, "Hui looked upon me as his father, yet I have not been able to treat him as my son. The fault is not in me, but in you, my disciples." Chi Lu inquired concerning men's duty to spirits. The master replied, "Before we are able to do our duty by the living, how can we do it by the spirits of the dead?" Chi Lu went on to inquire about death. The master said, "Before we know what life is, how can we know what death is?" Su Chang asked a question about clearness of mental vision. The master said, "He whose mind is proof against the slow-soaking poison of slander and the sharp stings of calumny may be called clear-sighted and far-seeing as well." The master said, "A man may know the 300 odes by heart, but if he proves himself incapable when given a post in the government, or cannot make a speech unaided when sent on a foreign mission, of what use to him is all his learning?" Su Kung asked, saying, "What may be said of a man who is beloved by all his fellow townsmen?" The master replied, "That is not enough to go upon." "What of one who is hated by all his fellow townsmen?" The master replied, "Neither is that enough to go upon. It would be otherwise if, among his fellow townsmen, the good loved him and the wicked hated him." The master said, "A good man must have trained the people for 7 years before they are fit to go to war. To take an untrained multitude into battle is equivalent to throwing them away. In a well-governed country, speak boldly and act boldly. In a country where lawlessness prevails, let your actions be bold, but your speech tactful. It is harder to be poor without murmuring than to be rich without arrogance. The men of olden times who studied virtue had only their own improvement in view. Those who study it now have an eye to the applause of others. Refusal to instruct one who is competent to learn entails the waste of a man. Instruction of one who is incompetent to learn entails waste of words. The wise man is he who wastes neither men nor words. Those whose care extends not far ahead will find their troubles near at hand. He who requires much from himself and little from others will be secure from hatred. If a man is not in the habit of asking, "What do you make of this? What do you make of that?" I can make nothing of him. Hopeless indeed is the case of those who can herd together all day long without once letting their conversation reach a higher plane, but are content to bandy smart and shallow wit. When a man is generally detested, or when he is generally beloved, closer examination is necessary. It is the man that is able to develop his virtue, not virtue that develops the man. The real fault is to have faults, and not try to amend them. Where there is education, there is no distinction of class. Men who differ in their principles cannot help each other in their plans. If language is lucid, that is enough. There are 3 errors to be avoided in the presence of a great man. The first is precipitancy, speaking before it is your turn to speak. The second is bashfulness, not speaking when your turn comes. And the third is heedlessness, speaking without observing the countenance of the listener. There are 3 impulses against which the nobler sort of man is on his guard. In the period of youth, when the heyday in the blood has not yet subsided, He guards against lustfulness. In the prime of life, when the physical frame is vigorous and strong, he guards against pugnacity. In old age, when the vital forces are in their decline, he guards against the greed of gain. The highest class of men are they whose knowledge is innate. Next to these are they whose knowledge is acquired by study. After them come those who are dull-witted, yet strive to learn, while those who are dull-witted and will make no effort to learn are the lowest of the people. When you see the good, act as though you could never quite come up with it. When you are brought face to face with evil, act as though you were trying the heat of boiling water. I have heard some such saying as this, and I have seen men live up to it. Dwell in retirement in order to work out your aims. Practice righteousness in order to apprehend the truth. Such a saying I have heard, but I have never seen a man live up to it. Men's natures are alike. It is their habits that carry them far apart. Only two classes of men never change, the wisest of the wise and the dullest of the dull. Speaking to Tsulu, the master said, "Have you ever heard, you, of the 6 shadows which attend 6 several virtues?" "No," he replied. "Sit down then, and I will tell you. Love of goodness without the will to learn casts the shadow called foolishness. Love of knowledge without the will to learn casts the shadow called instability. Love of truth without the will to learn casts the shadow called insensibility. Love of candor without the will to learn casts the shadow called rudeness. Love of daring without the will to learn casts the shadow called turbulence. Love of firmness without the will to learn casts the shadow called eccentricity. Ceremonies, forsooth. Can ceremonies be reduced to a mere matter of silken robes and jade ornaments? Music, forsooth. Can music be reduced to a mere matter of bells and drums? Men who are grave and stern in appearance, but inwardly weak and unprincipled, are they not comparable to the lowest class of humanity, sneaking thieves that break into houses by night? Your goody-goody people are the thieves of virtue. The master said, "Would that I could do without speaking." Tzu Kung said, "If our master never spoke, how could we, his disciples, transmit his doctrines?" The master replied, "Does God speak? The 4 seasons hold on their course, and all things continue to live and grow. Yet, tell me, does God speak?" Girls and servants are the most difficult people to handle. If you treat them familiarly, they become disrespectful. If you keep them at a distance, they resent it. Individual virtue. The master said, "Is he not a princely man, he who is never vexed that others know him not?" True virtue rarely goes with artful speech and insinuating looks. At home, a young man should show the qualities of a son. Abroad, those of a younger brother. He should be circumspect but truthful. He should have charity in his heart for all men, but associate only with the virtuous. After thus regulating his conduct, his surplus energy should be devoted to literary culture. In the matter of food and lodging, the nobler type of man does not seek mere repletion and comfort. He is earnest in his affairs and cautious in his speech, and frequents virtuous company for his own improvement. He may be called one truly bent on the study of virtue. Meng Yitsu asked for a definition of filial piety. The master said, "It consists in there being no falling off." Fan Chi was driving the master's carriage some time after, when the latter told him, saying, "Meng Yitsu asked me about filial piety, and I answered that it consisted in there being no falling off." Fan Chi said, "What did you mean?" The master replied, that parents should be served in the proper spirit while living, buried with the proper rite after death, and worshipped thereafter with the proper sacrifices. Meng Wu Po asked for a definition of filial piety. The master said, there is filial piety when parents are spared all anxiety about their children, except when they happen to fall sick. Tzu Yu put a question on the subject of filial piety. The master said, the filial piety of today reduces itself to the mere question of maintenance. Yet this is something in which even our dogs and horses have a share. Without the feeling of reverence, what is there to distinguish the two cases? Zhu Xia also asked about filial piety. The master said, it can hardly be gauged from mere outward acts. When there is work to be done, to relieve one's elders of the toil, or when there is wine and food, to cause them to partake thereof, is this to be reckoned filial piety? Zhu Kung inquired about the higher type of man. The master replied, the higher type of man is one who acts before he speaks, and professes only what he practices. The master said, the higher type of man is Catholic in his sympathy and free from party bias. The lower type of man is biased and unsympathetic. A man without charity in his heart. What has he to do with ceremonies? A man without charity in his heart. What has he to do with music? Lin Fang inquired, as to the prime essential in ceremonial observances. The master said, that is a great question indeed. In all rites, simplicity is better than extravagance. In mourning for the dead, heartfelt sorrow is better than punctiliousness. The master said, the true gentleman is never contentious. If a spirit of rivalry is anywhere unavoidable, it is at a shooting match. Yet even here he courteously salutes his opponents before taking up his position, and again when, having lost, he retires to drink the forfeit cup. So that even when competing, he remains a true gentleman. It is the spirit of charity which makes a locality good to dwell in. He who selects a neighborhood without regard to this quality cannot be considered wise. Only he who has the spirit of goodness within him is really able either to love or to hate. The princely man never for a single instant quits the path of virtue. In times of storm and stress, he remains in it as fast as ever. The nobler sort of man in his progress through the world has neither narrow predilections nor obstinate antipathies. What he follows is the line of duty. The nobler sort of man is proficient in the knowledge of his duty. The inferior man is proficient only in money-making. In serving his father and mother, a son may use gentle remonstrance. If he sees that they pay no heed, he should not desist, but merely increase in deference. If his pains are thrown away, he must show no resentment. While one's parents are alive, one should not travel to a distance. If one must travel, it should be in a fixed direction. The age of one's parents should always be kept in mind, on the one hand, as a subject for rejoicing, on the other, as a cause for alarm. The wise man will be slow to speak, but quick to act. Tzu Chang asked, saying, the Prime Minister Tzu Wen held office 3 times, but showed no joy. He lost it 3 times, but testified no concern. When he ceased to be Prime Minister, he was careful to explain the political situation to his successor. What is your opinion of him? The master said, he was loyal and conscientious. Had he not the highest degree of moral virtue? That I do not know. How can one judge of his moral virtue? Tzu Chang continued. When Cui Tzu slew the Prince of Qi, Chen Wen-tzu, though the possessor of 10 teams of war horses, forsook his wealth and turned his back on the country. Having come to another state, he said, here they are as bad as our own minister Cui Tzu, and departed. And he repeated this proceeding each time that he came to a new state. What is your opinion of him? The master said, he was pure and incorruptible. Had he not the highest degree of virtue? I cannot say. How is one to judge? The master said, when the solid outweighs the ornamental, we have boorishness. When the ornamental outweighs the solid, we have superficial smartness. Only from a proper blending of the two will the higher type of man emerge. All men are born good. He who loses his goodness, and yet lives, is lucky to escape. Better than one who knows what is right is one who is fond of what is right, and better than one who is fond of what is right is one who delights in what is right. Fanchi asked in what wisdom consisted. The master said, make righteousness in human affairs your aim. Treat all supernatural beings with respect, but keep aloof from them. Then you may be called wise. Asked about moral virtue, he replied, the virtuous man thinks of the difficult thing first, and makes material advantage only a secondary consideration. This may be said to constitute moral virtue. The master said, the man of knowledge finds pleasure in the sea, the man of virtue finds pleasure in the mountains. For the man of knowledge is restless, and the man of virtue is calm. The man of knowledge is happy, and the man of virtue is long-lived. The higher type of man, having gathered wide objective knowledge from the branches of polite learning, will regulate the whole by the inner rule of conduct, and will thus avoid overstepping the limit. That virtue is perfect, which adheres to a constant mean. It has long been rare amongst men. Tzu Kung asked, what would you say of the man who conferred benefits far and wide on the people, and was able to be the salvation of all? Would you pronounce him a man of moral virtue? Of moral virtue, said the master. Nay, rather of divine virtue. Even Yao and Shun were still striving to attain this height. The man of moral virtue, wishing to stand firm himself, will lend firmness unto others. Wishing himself to be illuminated, he will illuminate others. To be able to do to others as we would be done by, this is the true domain of moral virtue. It has not been my lot to see a divine man. Could I see a princely man, that would satisfy me. It has not been my lot to see a thoroughly virtuous man. Could I see a man possessing honesty of soul, that would satisfy me. Is it possible there should be honesty of soul in one who pretends to have what he has not, who, when empty, pretends to be overflowing, who, when in want, pretends to be in affluence? The higher type of man is calm and serene. The inferior man is constantly agitated and worried. With sincerity and truth, unite a desire for self-culture. Lay down your life rather than quit the path of virtue. Enter not the state which is tottering to its fall. Abide not in the state where sedition is rampant. When law obtains in the empire, let yourself be seen. When lawlessness reigns, retire into obscurity. In a state governed on right principles, poverty and low station are things to be ashamed of. In an ill-governed state, riches and rank are things to be ashamed of. The man of wisdom does not vacillate. The man of natural goodness does not fret. The man of valor does not fear. Yen Yuan inquired as to the meaning of true goodness. The master said, the subdual of self and reversion to the natural laws governing conduct, this is true goodness. If a man can for the space of one day subdue his selfishness and revert to natural laws, the whole world will call him good. True goodness springs from a man's own heart. How can it depend on other men? Yen Yuan said. Kindly tell me the practical rule to be deduced from this. The master replied, do not use your eyes, your ears, your power of speech, or your faculty of movement without obeying the inner law of self-control. Yen Yuan said, Though I am not quick in thought or act, I will make it my business to carry out this precept. Chung Kung inquired as to the meaning of true goodness. The master said, "When out of doors, behave as though you were entertaining a distinguished guest. In ruling the people, behave as though you were officiating at a solemn sacrifice. What you would not wish done to yourself, do not unto others. Then in public as in private life, you will excite no ill will." Chung Kung said, "Though I am not quick in thought or act, I will make it my business to carry out this precept." Suma Niu inquired as to the meaning of true goodness. The master said, "The truly good man is slow of speech." Slowness of speech. Is this what goodness consists in? The master said, "Does not the difficulty of deciding what it is right to do necessarily imply slowness to speak?" Suma Niu asked for a definition of the princely man. The master said, "The princely man is one who knows neither grief nor fear." Absence of grief and fear. Is this the mark of a princely man? The master said, "If on searching his heart he finds no guilt, why should he grieve? Of what should he be afraid?" Su Chang asked, "How to attain exalted virtue?" The master said, "Make conscientiousness and truth your guiding principles, and thus pass on to the cultivation of duty to your neighbor. This is exalted virtue." The master said, "The nobler sort of man emphasizes the good qualities in others and does not accentuate the bad. The inferior sort does the reverse." Su Chang asked, "What must a man do in order to be considered distinguished?" The master said, "What do you mean by the term distinguished?" Su Chang replied, "I mean one whose fame fills both his own private circle and the state at large." The master said, "That is notoriety, not distinction. The man of true distinction is simple, honest, and a lover of justice and duty. He weighs men's words and observes the expression of their faces. He is anxious to put himself below others. Such a one is truly distinguished in his private and his public life. As to the man who is merely much talked about, he puts on an appearance of charity and benevolence, but his actions belie it. He is self-satisfied and has no misgivings. Neither in private nor in public life does he achieve more than notoriety." Su Kung asked a question about friendship. The master said, "Be conscientious in speaking to your friend, but tactful in your efforts to guide him aright. If these fail, stop. Do not court a personal rebuff." The Duke of Shay addressed Confucius, saying, "We have an upright man in our country. His father stole a sheep, and the son bore witness against him." "In our country," Confucius replied, "uprightness is something different from this. A father hides the guilt of his son, and a son hides the guilt of his father. It is in such conduct that true uprightness is to be found." Fan Chi asked a question about moral virtue. The master said, "In private life, show self-respect. In the management of affairs, be attentive and thorough. In your dealings with others, be honest and conscientious. Never abandon these principles, even among savages." The master said, "The nobler sort of man is accommodating but not obsequious. The inferior sort is obsequious but not accommodating. The nobler sort of man is easy to serve yet difficult to please. Who seeks to please him in wrongful ways will not succeed. In exacting service from others, he takes account of aptitudes and limitations. The baser sort of man is difficult to serve yet easy to please. Who seeks to please him in any wrongful way will assuredly succeed, and he requires absolute perfection in those from whom he exacts service. The nobler sort of man is dignified but not proud. The inferior man is proud but not dignified. Xian said, to refrain from self-glorification, to subdue feelings of resentment, to control selfish desire, may this be held to constitute perfect virtue. The master said, these things may certainly be considered hard to achieve, but I am not so sure that they constitute perfect virtue. The master said, a man of inward virtue will have virtuous words on his lips, but a man of virtuous words is not always a virtuous man. The man of perfect goodness is sure to possess courage, but the courageous man is not necessarily good. Can true love be anything but exacting? How can our sense of duty allow us to abstain from admonition? The nobler sort of man tends upwards, the baser sort tends downwards. The princely type of man is modest in his speech, but liberal in his performance. The princely man has three great virtues, which I cannot claim for myself. He is truly benevolent and is free from care. He is truly wise and is free from delusions. He is truly brave and is free from fear. Nay, replied Tsukung, these virtues are our master's own. The master said, is not he a sage who neither anticipates deceit nor suspects bad faith in others, yet is prompt to detect them when they appear? Someone asked, how do you regard the principle of returning good for evil? The master said, what then is to be the return for good? Rather should you return justice for injustice and good for good. Tsulu asked about the conduct of the princely man. The master said, he cultivates himself so as to gain in self-respect. Does he rest content with that? He cultivates himself, was the reply, so as to give happiness to others. And is he content with that? He cultivates himself so as to confer peace and prosperity on the whole people. By self-cultivation to confer peace and prosperity on the whole people. Was not this the object which Yao and Shun still laboured to attain? Tsukung asked for advice on the practice of moral virtue. The master replied, if an artisan wants to do his work well, he must begin by sharpening his tools. Even so, among the great men of your country, you should serve the wise and good, and make friends of men who have this moral virtue. The master said, the higher type of man makes a sense of duty the groundwork of his character, blends with it in action a sense of harmonious proportion, manifests it in a spirit of unselfishness, and perfects it by the addition of sincerity and truth. Then indeed is he a noble character. The higher type of man seeks all that he wants in himself. The inferior man seeks all that he wants from others. The higher type of man is firm, but not quarrelsome, sociable, but not clannish. The wise man does not esteem a person more highly because of what he says, neither does he undervalue what is said because of the person who says it. Tsukung asked, saying, is there any one maxim which ought to be acted upon throughout one's whole life? The master replied, surely the maxim of charity is such. Do not unto others what you would not, they should do unto you. The nobler sort of man pays special attention to 9 points. He is anxious to see clearly, to hear distinctly, to be kindly in his looks, respectful in his demeanour, conscientious in his speech, earnest in his affairs. When in doubt, he is careful to inquire. When in anger, he thinks of the consequences. When offered an opportunity for gain, he thinks only of his duty. Tzu Chang asked Confucius a question about moral virtue. Confucius replied, moral virtue simply consists in being able, anywhere and everywhere, to exercise 5 particular qualities. Asked what these were, he said, self-respect, magnanimity, sincerity, earnestness, and benevolence. Show self-respect, and others will respect you. Be magnanimous, and you will win all hearts. Be sincere, and men will trust you. Be earnest, and you will achieve great things. Be benevolent, and you will be fit to impose your will on others. Zulu asked, "Docs not the princely man value courage?" The master said, "He puts righteousness first. The man of high station who has courage without righteousness is a menace to the state. The common man who has courage without righteousness is nothing more than a brigand." Tsukung asked, "Has the nobler sort of man any hatreds?" The master replied, "He has. He hates those who publish the faults of others. He hates men of low condition who vilify those above them. He hates those whose courage is unaccompanied by self-restraint. He hates those who are audacious but narrow-minded. And you, Tsu," he added, "have you also your hatreds?" "I hate," replied the disciple, "those who think that wisdom consists in prying and meddling, courage in showing no compliance, and honesty in denouncing other men." Personalia. In his moments of leisure, the master's manner was uniformly cheerful and smiling. If the master happened to be dining beside one who was in mourning for his parents, he never ate a full meal. He never sang on any day in the course of which he had been bewailing a death. The master would never talk about prodigies, feats of strength, crime, or supernatural beings. The master made 4 things the subject of his teaching: a knowledge of literature and the arts, conduct, conscientiousness, and truthfulness. The master fished with a line, but not with a net. When he went out with bow and arrow, he only shot at birds on the wing. If the master happened to be with singers, and they sang a piece well, he would get them to repeat it, when he would also join in the song himself. The master was affable, yet grave, stern, but not fierce, attentive in his behaviour, and yet calm. The master seldom spoke of money-making, of the laws of providence, or of moral virtue. There were 4 words of which the master barred the use. He would have no shalls, no musts, no certainlys, no eyes. Whenever the master saw a person in mourning, or in official robes, or one who was blind, he would at once rise from his seat, even though the other were his junior, or if he passed them in the street, he would quicken his step. Once, when the master was lying seriously ill, Tsu Lu got the disciples to act the part of ministers of state. In an interval of his sickness, Confucius said, "What a long time Yu has been keeping up this imposture, in pretending to have ministers attendant on me when I have none. Whom am I deceiving? Am I deceiving God? But apart from that, is it not better that I should breathe my last in the arms of my disciples than that I should die in the midst of officials? And after all, though I may not be accorded the honour of a public funeral, I am not dying out on the high road." The master wished to settle among the 9 eastern tribes. Someone said, "How can you? They are savages." The master replied, "If a higher type of man dwelt in their midst, how could their savage condition last?" Confucius in his native village was simple and unassuming. He gave the impression of being no great speaker. In the ancestral temple and at court, he spoke fluently, but with a certain reserve. At court, he spoke to the ministers of lower rank with frankness and affability. To those of higher rank he spoke quietly, but with decision. In the presence of his sovereign, he seemed full of awe, but at the same time grave and collected. When employed by the prince in the reception of distinguished visitors, his expression would change, and his legs seemed to bend under him. Standing in the presence of the visitors, he saluted them with clasped hands, turning about from right to left, and keeping the skirt of his robe properly adjusted, back and front. He then hastened forward with arms extended, like the wings of a bird. When a visitor departed, he would report in that sense to the prince, saying, "The visitor is not looking back." When he entered the gate of the palace, he seemed to bend his body as though the gate were not large enough to let him pass. He did not stand in the middle of the doorway, nor in passing through did he set foot on the threshold. When he passed the prince's throne, his expression seemed to change, his legs seemed to bend under him, and words seemed to fail him. Holding up his robe with both hands, he ascended the dais, his body slightly bent, and holding his breath as though he dared not breathe. When he came out from his audience and had descended the first step, his countenance lost its anxious expression, and he looked serene and happy. When he reached the bottom of the steps, he hastened away with his arms outstretched like wings, but when he got back to his place, he still seemed full of awe. He carried the prince's regalia with body slightly bent, as though he could hardly support its weight. He raised it to the height of his head, and lowered it again to the height of his chest. His countenance indicated nervousness, and he dragged his feet as though something held them to the ground. In offering presents as an ambassador, his appearance was sedate. At a private audience, he wore a pleased look. He would not eat meat that was clumsily cut or served without its proper sauce. Although there might be an abundance of meat, he never let it exceed in quantity the vegetable food. In wine alone, he laid down for himself no particular limit, but he never reached the stage of intoxication. He took ginger at every meal. He did not eat much. When eating, he did not converse. When in bed, he did not speak. Even though he had nothing but coarse rice and vegetable soup, he would always reverently offer some to the ancestral spirits. He would not sit on a mat that was placed awry. On one occasion, Chi Kang-tsu having sent him some medicine, he bowed as he received it, saying, "Not being familiar with this drug, I would not venture to try it." His stables having been burnt down, the master on his return from the court said, "Has anyone been hurt?" He did not ask about the horses. If the prince sent him a present of cooked meat, he would sit down to taste it on a properly placed mat. If the prince sent him a present of raw meat, he would have it cooked and offer it in sacrifice. If the prince sent him a live animal, he would keep it alive. When the prince summoned him to his presence, he would go on foot without waiting for his carriage. If any of his friends died who was without a home or relations, he would say, "I will see to the funeral." In bed, he did not lie like a corpse. In his home life, his manner was not too formal. At the sight of a person in mourning, though it might be an intimate acquaintance, he would always look grave. On meeting an official in uniform or a blind man, however ragged, he would always show him some mark of respect. When a rich banquet was set before him, he would show his appreciation in his looks, and rise to return thanks. He would change countenance at a thunderclap or a sudden squall of wind. When in his carriage, he would not look behind him, talk rapidly, or point with his finger. Duke Ling of Wei asked Confucius about the disposition of troops in warfare. Confucius answered, "I know something about the arts of peace, but I have never studied the art of war." And on the morrow he departed. But when he came to the state of Chen, he was cut off from supplies, and his followers were so enfeebled that they could hardly stand. Tzu Lu indignantly sought the master's presence, saying, "Is it for the princely man to feel the pinch of privation?" The master replied, "Assuredly privation may come his way, but it is only the baser type of man who under it grows demoralized and reckless." Mian, a blind musician, having called on Confucius, the master said to him when he came to a flight of steps, "Here are the steps," and when he came to the mat which was spread for him, "Here is your mat." When all the visitors were seated, the master told him who they were, saying, "So-and-so is sitting here, so-and-so is sitting there." After Mian had gone, Su Chang asked, saying, "Is it the proper thing to speak thus to a musician?" The master replied, "Assuredly it is right to give this help to a blind man." The people of Qi sent a band of singing girls as a present to the Duke of Lu, and Qi Huangzu accepted the gift. For 3 days after that, no court was held, and Confucius departed. Confucius's estimate of others. The master said, "I may talk all day to Hui without his putting in a word of criticism or dissent, just as though he were deficient in understanding. But after he has left me, I find, on examining his private conduct, that he knows for all that how to exemplify my teaching. No, Hui is not deficient in understanding." Zhu Keng asked, saying, "What, sir, is your opinion of me?" "I would liken you, Zhu," replied the master, "to a vessel limited in its function." "What sort of vessel?" asked Zhu Keng. "A richly ornamented sacrificial vessel," was the reply. Someone remarked that Jung had goodness of heart, but no cleverness of speech. The master said, "Of what use is cleverness of speech? Those who are always ready to assail others with their tongue are sure to make themselves disliked. As to Jung's goodness of heart, I have no certain knowledge. But how would he benefit by having cleverness of speech?" The master said, "My teaching makes no headway. How and if I were to board a raft and float away over the sea, my friend Yu would come with me, I feel sure." Zulu, hearing this, was glad. The master continued, "Yu surpasses me in his love of daring, but he lacks discretion and judgment." Meng Wu Po asked whether Tzu Lu had true moral virtue. The master replied, "I do not know." Asked a second time, the master said, "You might be trusted to organize the military levies of a large and powerful state, but whether he is possessed of true virtue, I cannot say. And what is your opinion with regard to Chao?" The master said, "Chao might be entrusted with the government of a district, numbering 1,000 households or 100 war chariots, but whether he has true virtue, I cannot say." "And Chi, what of him?" The master said, "Chi might be employed to stand in his official dress at a royal levee and converse with the visitors and guests. Whether he has true virtue, I cannot say." The master, addressing Zhu Keng, said, "Which of the two is the better man, you or Hui?" Zhu Keng replied, "How can I venture to compare myself with Hui? Hui hears one point and promptly masters the whole. I hear one point and am only able to feel my way to a second." The master agreed. "No, you are not equal to Hui. Neither of us two is equal to Hui. Tsai Yu used to sleep during the day." The master said, "Rotten wood cannot be carved. Walls made of dirt and mud cannot be plastered. What is the good of reprimanding you?" At first he continued, "My way of dealing with others was to listen to their words and to take their actions upon trust. Now, my way is to listen to what they say and then to watch what they do. This change in me is owing to you." The master said, "I have never yet met a really strong character." Someone suggested Shen Cheng. The master said, "Cheng is a slave to his passions. How can he possess strength of character?" Zhu Keng said, "I am anxious to avoid doing to others that which I would not have them do to me." The master said, "Zhu, you have not got as far as that." The master said of Zhu Chan that he had 4 of the qualities of the princely man. In his personal demeanour, he was grave. In serving those above him, he was attentive. In his care for the people, he was kind. In his ordering of the people, he was just. The master said, "Yen Ping knows the art of associating with his friends, However old the acquaintance may be, he always treats them with the same respect. Ning Wutsu's behavior was wise, so long as his country was well governed. When revolution came, his behavior was stupid. His wisdom may be equaled by others, but his stupidity is beyond all imitation. Po Wai and Shu Qi never remembered old injuries, and therefore their enemies were few. Who will say that Wei Sheng Kao was an upright man? When asked by somebody for some vinegar, he went and begged it of a neighbour, and gave this to the man who had asked him. For the space of 3 months together, Hui would not deviate in spirit from the path of perfect virtue. My other disciples may attain this height once in a day or in a month, but that is all. Po knew lying sick unto death, the master went to visit him. He clasped his hand through the window and said, "He is dying. Such is fate. Alas, that such a man should have such an illness, that such a man should have such an illness." The master said, Hui was indeed a philosopher. Other men living as he did in a miserable alley, with a single dish of food and a single bowl of drink, could not have endured the distress. But Hui was invariably cheerful. He was a philosopher indeed. Jian Qiyu said, "It is not that I have no joy in my master's teaching. It is my strength that fails me." The master replied, "Those whose strength fails them fall fainting by the way. What you do is to set up bounds which you will not attempt to pass." The master said, "Meng Chi Fan is no braggart. Once after a defeat, when he was bringing up the rear, he whipped his horse as he was about to enter the city gate and cried, 'It is not courage that makes me last. It is my horse that won't gallop fast enough.'" The master, addressing Yen Yuan, said, "It is only you and I who would be content to accept public employment when it was offered to us, and to retire into obscurity when we were dismissed." Tzu Lu then said, "If you, sir, had the conduct of 3 legions, whom would you associate with yourself in the command?" "I would not," replied the master, "choose a man who would attack a tiger unarmed, cross a river without a boat, or sacrifice his life without a moment's regret. Rather should it be one who would not embark on an enterprise without anxiety, and who was accustomed to lay his plans well before putting them into execution." The master said, Tai Po may be said to have reached the summit of virtue. Having resolutely renounced the imperial throne, he put it out of the people's power to glorify his act of renunciation. In the Emperor Yu, I find no loophole for censure. His own food and drink were plain, but his offerings to the ancestral spirits showed extreme piety. His own garments were poor, but his robes and cap of state were extremely fine. His own dwelling was humble, but he spent all his strength on the construction of public canals and watercourses. I find no loophole for censure in Yu. After the word had gone forth, Hui was never backward in his deeds. The master, speaking of Yen Yuan, said, "Ah, what a loss! I used to see him ever progressing and never coming to a standstill." The master said, "Yu, I fancy, is a man who would stand up, dressed in shabby garments quilted with hemp, among people attired in furs of fox and badger, and not be ashamed. Hating none and courting none, how can he be other than good?" As Tzu Lu kept constantly humming over this line, the master said, "This rule of conduct is not enough by itself to constitute goodness." The master said, "None of those who accompanied me on the journey to the states of Chain and Tsai come to learn from me now. Distinguished for their virtuous conduct were Yen Yuan, Min Tzu Chien, Jian Ponyu, and Chung Kung; for their skill in speaking, Tsai Wo and Tzu Kung; for their administrative powers, Jian Yu and Qi Lu; for their literary attainments, Tzu Yu and Tzu Xia. Hui does not help me. He takes such delight in everything I say." What noble piety is that of Min Tzu Chien? Other men speak of him in exactly the same terms as his own parents and his own brethren. When Yen Yuan died, the master wept with passionate grief, so that those who were with him said, "Master, your sorrow is too passionate." "Is it too passionate?" he replied. "Whose death should be a cause for violent grief, if not this man's?" On one occasion, they were standing in attendance on the master Min Tzu, looking gentle and mild, Tzu Lu looking upright and soldierly, Jian Yu and Tzu Kung looking frank and affable. The master was pleased. "A man like you," he remarked, "will not come by a natural death." The master said, "Why is Yu playing his martial music at my door?" The disciples began to lose their respect for Tzu Lu, whereupon the master said, "Yu has ascended the steps of the temple, though he has not yet reached the inner sanctuary." Tzu Kung asked which was the man of greater worth, Shi or Shang. The master replied, "Shi exceeds and Shang falls short. Then Shi is the better of the two." The master said, "To exceed is as bad as to fall short." The head of the Qi clan was already richer than Cho Kung, yet Chiu kept levying taxes for him and adding to his wealth. "He is no disciple of mine," said the master. "My children, you may beat the drum and attack him." The master said, "Hui reaches the verge of perfection, yet he is often in great want. Tzu does not resign himself to the will of heaven, yet his worldly goods continue to increase. His judgments, however, frequently hit the mark." Tzu Lu asked if he should at once put the precepts which he heard into practice. The master said, "There are your father and elder brothers to consult first. Why should you be so impatient to act on what you hear?" Jian Yu asked the same question, and the master said, "Yes, act at once according to the instruction that is given to you." Kung Ha Shi Hua then said, "When you asked if he should put the precepts which he heard into practice, you replied, sir, that he had his father and elder brothers to consult first. When Chiu asked the same question, you said, 'Act at once according to the instruction that is given to you.' Now I am puzzled, and beg for an explanation." The master replied, "Chiu is apt to hang back, therefore I press him on. Yu has eagerness enough for two, therefore I hold him back." Chi Tzujan asked if Chung Yu and Zhan Qiyu could be termed great ministers. The master said, "I thought you had something extraordinary to ask about, and now it turns out to be a question about Yu and Qiyu. What men call a great minister is one who serves his prince according to the principles of truth and virtue, and when that is impossible, resigns. Yu and Qiyu, however, can only be termed ordinary officials, which is as much as to say that they will always obediently follow their master's will?" The master replied, "They would not follow him so far as to commit parricide or regicide." The master said, "Yu is the man to settle a long litigation in a few words." Tzu Kung was fond of weighing other men's merits and defects. The master said, "Surely Tzu must be a very great sage. Personally, I have no time for this." Government and public affairs. The master said, "In ruling a country of 1,000 chariots, there should be scrupulous attention to business, honesty, economy, charity, and employment of the people at the proper season. A virtuous ruler is like the pole star, which keeps its place, while all the other stars do homage to it. People despotically governed and kept in order by punishments may avoid infraction of the law, but they will lose their moral sense. People virtuously governed and kept in order by the inner law of self-control will retain their moral sense, and moreover become good." Duke Ai asked, saying, "What must I do that my people may be contented?" Confucius replied, "Promote the upright and dismiss all evildoers, and the people will be contented. Promote the evildoers and dismiss the upright, and the people will be discontented." Chi Kung Tzu asked by what means he might cause his people to be respectful and loyal, and encourage them in the path of virtue. The master replied, "Conduct yourself towards them with dignity, and you will earn their respect. Be a good son and a kind prince, and you will find them loyal. Promote the deserving, and instruct those who fall short, and they will be encouraged to follow the path of virtue." Someone, addressing Confucius, said, "Why, sir, do you take no part in the government?" The master replied, "What does the book of history say about filial piety? Do your duty as a son and as a brother, and these qualities will make themselves felt in the government." This, then, really amounts to taking part in the government. Holding office need not be considered essential. The people can be made to follow a certain path, but they cannot be made to know the reason why. Zhu Kung asked for a definition of good government. The master replied, "It consists in providing enough food to eat, in keeping enough soldiers to guard the state, and in winning the confidence of the people." And if one of these three things had to be sacrificed, which should go first? The master replied, "Sacrifice the soldiers." And if of the two remaining things one had to be sacrificed, which should it be? The master said, "Let it be the food. From the beginning, men have always had to die. But without the confidence of the people, no government can stand at all." Qing, Duke of the Qi state, questioned Confucius on the art of government. Confucius replied, "Let the sovereign do his duty as a sovereign, the subject his duty as a subject, the father his duty as a father, and the son his duty as a son." "A good answer," said the Duke, "for unless sovereign and subject, father and son do their respective duties, however much grain there may be in the land, I could obtain none to eat." Tzu Chang put a question about the art of governing. The master said, "Devote yourself patiently to the theory, and conscientiously to the practice of government." Chi Kung Tzu asked Confucius for advice on the subject of government. Confucius replied, "To govern is to keep straight. If you, sir, lead the people straight, which of your subjects will venture to fall out of line?" Chi Kung Tzu, being vexed by robbers, asked Confucius for his advice. Confucius replied, saying, "If you, sir, can check your own cupidity, there will be no stealing, even though rewards should be offered for theft." Chi Kung Tzu questioned Confucius on a point of government, saying, "Ought not I to cut off the lawless in order to establish law and order? What do you think?" Confucius replied, "Sir, what need is there of the death penalty in your system of government? If you showed a sincere desire to be good, your people would likewise be good. The virtue of the prince is like unto wind, that of the people like unto grass. For it is the nature of grass to bend when the wind blows upon it." Zulu asked for a hint on the art of governing. The master replied, "Take the lead and set the example of diligent toil." Asked for a further hint, he said, "Be patient and untiring." Chung Kung, being prime minister to the head of the Qi clan, asked for advice on governing. The master said, "Make a point of employing your subordinates, overlook trifling mistakes, raise to office worthy and able men." "But," said Chung Kung, "how am I to discover these worthy men and single them out for promotion?" "Promote those that you know," was the reply. "As for those that you do not know, will not their claims be brought before you by others?" Zulu said, "The Prince of Wei is waiting, sir, for you to take up the reins of government. Pray, what is the first reform you would introduce? The master replied, I would begin by defining terms and making them exact. Oh, indeed, exclaimed Zulu. But how can you possibly put tiling straight by such a circuitous route? The master said, How unmannerly you are, you! In matters which he does not understand, the wise man will always reserve his judgment. If terms are not correctly defined, words will not harmonize with things. If words do not harmonize with things, public business will remain undone. If public business remains undone, order and harmony will not flourish. If order and harmony do not flourish, law and justice will not attain their ends. If law and justice do not attain their ends, the people will be unable to move hand or foot. The wise man therefore frames his definitions to regulate his speech, and his speech to regulate his actions. He is never reckless in his choice of words. Fanchi asked to be taught the art of husbandry. The master said, Any farmer can teach you that better than I can. He then asked to be taught gardening. The master said, Any gardener will teach you that better than I can. Fanchi, having gone out, the master said, What a small-minded man is Fan Shu. If the ruler is addicted to modesty and self-control, his people will not permit themselves to be irreverent. If the ruler loves justice and duty, his people will not venture to be unruly. If the ruler loves sincerity and good faith, the people will not be slow to respond. Such being his qualities, the people will flock to him from all quarters, with their babes strapped to their backs. What need for him to know the art of husbandry? The master said, If the ruler is personally upright, his subjects will do their duty unbidden. If he is not personally upright, they will not obey, whatever his bidding. When the master went away, Jian Yu drove his carriage. The master said, What an abundant population. Jian Yu said, Now that the people are so abundant, what is the next thing to be done? Enrich them, said Confucius. And having enriched them, what then? Teach them, was the reply. The master said, If a country had none but good rulers for 100 years, crime might be stamped out and the death penalty abolished. How true this saying is. If a kingly sovereign were to appear, by the end of one generation, natural goodness would prevail. If a man can reform his own heart, what should hinder him from taking part in government? But if he cannot reform his own heart, what has he to do with reforming others? Duke Ting asked if there was a single sentence by which a country might be made to flourish. Confucius answered, No single sentence can be expected to have such a virtue as this, but there is the common saying. To be a good king is difficult. To be a good minister is not easy. He who realizes the difficulty of being a good king, has he not almost succeeded in making his country prosper by a single sentence? Is there a single sentence, continued the Duke, by which a country can be ruined? Confucius answered, No such power can reside in any single sentence. But there is a saying, I have no joy in kingly rule. I rejoice only because none can oppose my will. Now if the king's will is good, and none opposes it, all may be well. But if it is not good, and yet none opposes it, has he not almost succeeded in ruining his country by a single sentence? The Duke of Shay asked about the conditions of good government. The master said, Government is good when it makes happy those who live under it and attracts those who live far away. Su Xia, when governor of Chufu, asked for advice on government. The master said, Do not try to do things in a hurry. Do not be intent on small gains. What is done quickly is not done thoroughly, and if small gains are considered, great things remain unaccomplished. Zulu asked about the service due to a prince. The master said, "Use no deceit, but if you oppose him openly." The master said, "If the ruler cherishes the principle of self-control, the people will be docile to his commands." Shun was one who did nothing, yet governed well. For what, in effect, did he do? Religiously self-observant, he sat gravely on his throne, and that is all. In serving your prince, make the actual service your first care, and only put the emolument second. The head of the Qi clan was on the point of attacking the small principality of Chuan Yu. Jian Yu and Qi Lu came to see Confucius and said, "Our lord is going to have trouble with Chuan Yu." Confucius said, "Is it not you, Qiu, who are to blame in this?" The ancient kings long ago made Chuan Yu the center of the worship of the eastern Meng mountain, and moreover, it is situated within the territory of Lu. Its ruler has independent priestly functions. What right have you to attack it? Jian Yu replied, "It is the will of our master. We, his ministers, have neither of us any wish to act thus." "Qiu," said Confucius, Chou Zhen had a saying, "If you are capable of displaying energy, hold office. If not, resign." Of what use is that minister likely to be, who does not sustain his master in the presence of danger, or support him when about to fall? Besides, what you say is wrong. If a tiger or a wild buffalo escapes from its cage, if a tortoise shell or jade ornament is smashed in its casket, whose fault is it, pray? Jian Yu replied, "But Chuan Yu is strongly fortified and close to our own town of Pai. If we do not take it now, it will cause trouble to our descendants in a later generation." Confucius rejoined, "Qiu, an honest man hates your hypocrite, who will not openly avow his greed, but tries instead to excuse it. I have heard that the ruler of a state or of a clan is troubled not by the smallness of its numbers, but by the absence of even-handed justice, not by poverty, but by the presence of discontent. For where there is justice, there will be no poverty. Where there is harmony, there will be no lack in numbers. Where there is content, there will be no revolution." This being the case then, if outlying communities resist your authority, cultivate the arts of refinement and goodness in order to attract them, and when you have attracted them, make them happy and contented. Now you two, you and Qiu, are aiding and abetting your master. Here is an outlying community which resists your authority, and you are unable to attract it. Partition and collapse are imminent in your own state, and you are unable to preserve it intact. And yet you are planning military aggression within the borders of your country. Verily, I fear that Chisun's troubles will come, not from Chuan Yu, but from the interior of his own palace. When the master came to Wucheng, he heard the sound of singing and stringed instruments. He was pleased, but said with a smile, "Is it necessary to take a poleaxe to kill a fowl?" Tzu Yu replied, "Some time ago, sir, I heard you say that the study of true principles made the ruler beneficent and men of the lower class easy to govern." "My children," said the master, "Yen is right. What I said was only in jest." Tzu Chang asked Confucius, saying, "What are the essentials of good government?" The master said, "Esteem the 5 excellent, and banish the 4 evil things. Then you will become fit to govern." Tzu Chang asked, "What are the 5 excellent things?" The master replied, "The wise and good ruler is benevolent without expending treasure. He lays burdens on the people without causing them to grumble. He has desires without being covetous. He is serene without being proud. He is awe-inspiring without being ferocious. He is benevolent without expending treasure." What does that mean? The master replied, "He simply follows the course which naturally brings benefit to the people. Is he not thus benevolent without expending treasure? In imposing burdens, he chooses the right time and the right means, and nobody can grumble. His desire is for goodness, and he achieves it. How should he be covetous? The wise and good ruler never allows himself to be negligent, whether he is dealing with many men or with few, with small matters or with great. Is this not serenity without pride? He has his cap and robe properly adjusted and throws a noble dignity into his looks so that his gravity inspires onlookers with respect. Is he not thus awe-inspiring without being ferocious? Su Chang then asked, "What are the 4 evil things?" The master said, "Cruelty, leaving the people in their native ignorance, yet punishing their wrongdoing with death. Oppression, requiring the immediate completion of tasks imposed without previous warning. Ruthlessness, giving vague orders and then insisting on punctual fulfillment. Peddling husbandry, stinginess in conferring the proper rewards on deserving men." Confucius on himself. The Master. I will not be grieved that other men do not know me. I will be grieved that I do not know other men. At 15, my mind was bent on learning. At 30, I stood firm. At 40, I was free from delusions. At 50, I understood the laws of providence. At 60, my ears were attentive to the truth. At 70, I could follow the promptings of my heart without overstepping the mean. Tzu Kung was for doing away with the customary sacrifice of a sheep on the first day of the month. The master said, "Ah, Tzu, you grudge the loss of a sheep, but I grudge the loss of a ceremony." The master said, "In any hamlet of 12 houses, you will surely find men as honest and conscientious as myself, though they may not be so devoted to ethical study." The master having gone to visit Nantzu, Tzu Lu was displeased. Thereupon Confucius swore a solemn oath, saying, "In whatsoever I have sinned, may I be abominable in the sight of God." The master said, "My function is to indicate, rather than to originate. Regarding antiquity as I do with trust and affection, I would venture to compare myself with our ancient patriarch Peng Tzu. The unpretentious hiving of wisdom, patient self-cultivation, and untiring instruction of others. To which of these can I make any claim? The failure to cultivate virtue, the failure to examine and analyze what I have learnt, the inability to move towards righteousness after being shown the way, the inability to correct my faults. These are the causes of my grief. Alas, what a falling off is here. Long is it since I dreamt of Cho Kung. There is no one, from the man who brings me dried meat as payment upwards, to whom I have refused my instruction. I do not expound my teaching to any who are not eager to learn. I do not help out anyone who is not anxious to explain himself. If, after being shown one corner of a subject, a man cannot go on to discover the other 3, I do not repeat the lesson. If the pursuit of riches were a commendable pursuit, I would join in it, even if I had to become a chariot driver for the purpose. But seeing that it is not a commendable pursuit, I engage in those which are more to my taste. The Duke of Shay questioned Tzu Lu about Confucius. Tzu Lu made no reply. The master said to him afterwards, "Why did you not say, 'He is a man whose zeal for self-improvement is such that he forgets to eat'? Whose happiness in this pursuit is so great that he forgets his troubles and does not perceive old age stealing upon him?" The master said, "In me, knowledge is not innate. I am but one who loves antiquity, and is earnest in the study of it. If I am walking with 2 other men, each of them will serve as my teacher. I will pick out the good points of the one and imitate them, and the bad points of the other, and correct them in myself. My disciples, Do you think that I have any secrets? I have no secrets from you. It is my way to do nothing without communicating it to you, my disciples. There are men, I dare say, who act rightly without knowing the reason why, but I am not one of them. Having heard much, I sift out the good and practice it. Having seen much, I retain it in my memory. This is the second order of wisdom. In literary accomplishments, I am perhaps equal to other men, but I have not yet succeeded in exhibiting the conduct of the princely man in my own person. To divine wisdom and perfect virtue I can lay no claim. All that can be said of me is that I never falter in the course which I pursue, and am unwearying in my instruction of others. This, and nothing more. Kung Shi Hua said, "But those are just the qualities that we, your disciples, are unable to acquire." The master being grievously sick, Zulu proposed the offering up of a prayer. "Is there a precedent for this?" asked the master. Zulu replied, "There is. In the eulogies it is written, 'We pray unto you, O spirits of heaven and earth.'" The master said, "My prayers began long ago." The master was passing through a by-street when a man of the district shouted, "Great is Confucius the philosopher. Yet for all his wide learning, he has nothing which can bring him fame." On hearing this, the master turned to his disciples and said, "What shall I take up? Shall I take up charioteering, or shall I take up archery? I will take up charioteering." The master said, "The ancient rites prescribe linen as the material for a ceremonial cap, but nowadays silk is used as being more economical. In this matter, I fall in with the general custom. According to the ancient rites, the prince is to be saluted from below the dais, but nowadays the salutation takes place above. This is presumptuous, and therefore, though infringing thereby the general custom, I adopt the humbler position." A high officer asked Zhu Kung, saying, "Surely your master is a divine prophet. What a variety of accomplishments he seems to possess." Zhu Kung replied, "Truly he must be a prophet, so richly has he been endowed by God, and he has also perfected himself in various arts." The master, being told of this, said, "Does His Excellency really know me now for what I am? Being of low condition as a boy, I did become skilled in various arts, but these are base accomplishments after all. If asked whether the higher type of man has many such accomplishments, I should say, not many." The master said, "Am I possessed of true knowledge? Not so. But if an ignorant fellow from the lower class comes to me with a question, I will discuss the subject from end to end and set it fully before him." Zhu Kung said to Confucius, "If you had a lovely jewel, would you hide it away in a casket, or would you try to sell it for a good price?" The master replied, "Oh, certainly I would sell it, but I would wait until a price was offered." The master said, "Out of doors, to tender faithful service to prince and ministers, at home, to be duteous towards father and elder brothers, to observe the rites of mourning with the utmost care, to avoid being overcome with wine. Which of these virtues have I?" In matters pertaining to ceremonies and music, the ancients were more or less uncivilized in comparison with the refinement of a later age. Nevertheless, in practice, I take the earlier period as my guide. As an arbiter in litigation, I am no better than other men. But surely the grand object to achieve is that there shall be no litigation at all. Wei Sheng Mao, addressing Confucius, said, "Chiyu, why is it you keep hopping about thus from place to place? Is it not in order to show off your fine rhetoric?" Confucius replied, "I do not allow myself to indulge in fine rhetoric. No, it is because I consider obstinacy a fault." The master said, "There are none who know me for what I am." Zhu Kung said, "How is it, sir, that none know you?" The master replied, "I make no complaint against heaven, neither do I blame my fellow men. In the study of virtue, I begin at the bottom and tend upwards. Surely heaven knows me for what I am." Zhu, do you look upon me as a man who has studied and retained a mass of various knowledge? "I do," he replied. "Am I wrong?" "You are wrong," said the master. "All my knowledge is strung on one connecting thread. I used to spend whole days without food and whole nights without sleep in order to meditate. But I made no progress. Study, I found, was better." Pai Si sent an invitation to Confucius, and the master wished to go. Zhu Lu, however, said, "Once upon a time, sir, I heard you say that the nobler sort of man would not enter into intimacy with one who laid himself out to do wrong. Now Pai Si has raised the standard of rebellion in Chung Mu. How can you think of going thither?" "True," replied the master. "Those were my words. But is there not a saying, 'The hard may be rubbed without losing its substance. The white may be steeped without losing its purity.' Am I then a bitter gourd, fit only to be hung up and not eaten?" Confucius as seen by others. Zhu Qin asked Zhu Kung, saying, "Whenever our master comes to any new country, he is sure to find out all about its method of government. Does he seek this information himself, or is it voluntarily proffered?" Zhu Kung replied, "Our master gains his information because he is so genial and good, so full of deference, modesty, and regard for others. In seeking information, how differently does he behave from ordinary men?" The master, having gone up into the grand temple, asked questions about everything. Someone remarked, "Who says that the son of the citizen of Chu has any knowledge of ceremonial observances?" He comes to the temple and asks about everything he sees. Hearing the remark, the master said, "This in itself is a ceremonial observance." The prefect of the frontier in the town of Ai asked to be introduced to Confucius, saying, "I have never failed to obtain an audience of any sage who has visited these parts." He was thereupon introduced by the master's followers, and on coming out he said, "My sons, why grieve at your master's fall from power? The empire has long been lying in evil ways, but now God is going to make Confucius his herald to rouse the land." The master said, "Shen, a single principle runs through all my teaching." Tseng Tzu answered, "Yes." When the master had gone out, the disciples asked, saying, "What principle does he mean?" Tseng Tzu said, "Our master's teaching simply amounts to this: loyalty to oneself and charity to one's neighbor." Yen Yuan heaved a deep sigh and said, "The more I look at our master's teaching, the higher it seems. The more I test it, the more reliable it appears. I am gazing at it in front of me, when lo, it is suddenly behind me." Our master knows how to draw men after him by regular steps. He broadens our outlook by means of polite learning, and restrains our impulses by means of inward self-control. Even if I wished to stop, I could not do so. Yet after I have exhausted all my efforts in pursuit of the goal, there still remains something inaccessible rising up beyond. And though I would fain make towards it, I cannot find the way. Zhu Lu once passed the night in Shimen, where the gatekeeper said to him, "Where do you come from?" Zhu Lu replied, "From the school of Confucius." "Oh, is he not the man," said the other, "who is trying to do what he knows to be impossible?" Chen Kang asked Po Yu, saying, "Have you ever received any secret teaching from your father?" He replied, "No. But once, when I was passing hurriedly through our hall, I met my father standing alone, and he said, 'Have you studied the Odes?' I replied, 'Not yet.' He said, 'If you do not study the Odes, you will have no conversation.' Thereupon I withdrew and studied the Odes. Another day I met him again, standing alone as I hastened through the hall, and he said, 'Have you studied the Book of Rites?' I replied, 'Not yet.' He said, 'If you do not study the Book of Rites, you will have no stability of character.' I withdrew and studied the Book of Rites. These are the two pieces of instruction I have received." Chen Kang went away rejoicing and said, "I asked about one thing and have learned three. Something about the Odes, something about the rites, and also that the higher type of man has no secrets, even with his own son." Yang Huo wished to have an interview with Confucius, but Confucius would not go to see him. He therefore sent Confucius a sucking pig as a present. Confucius, however, chose a time when the other was out to go and pay his respects, but he happened to fall in with him on the road. Thereupon, Yang Huo addressed Confucius, saying, "Come with me. I have something to say to you." Can he be called truly benevolent, who hugs his jewel to his bosom and allows his country to drift into confusion? "He cannot," was the reply. Can he be called truly wise, who wishes to engage in public affairs, yet loses several opportunities of doing so? "He cannot." "Well," rejoined Yang Huo, "the days and months are fleeting by, and the years will not wait for us." "True," replied Confucius. "I will presently take office." The eccentric Chie Yu of the Chu state passed Confucius's carriage singing, "O Phonix, O Phonix, how has thy virtue fallen? The past need no longer be a subject of reproof, but against the future it is still possible to provide. Desist, desist. Great is the danger of those who now engage in government." Confucius alighted, wishing to speak with him, but Chie Yu hastened rapidly away, and he was unable to get speech of him. Chang Chu and Qiani were working together in the fields when Confucius passed by and sent Tzu Lu to ascertain from them the whereabouts of the ford. Chang Chu asked, "Who is that man holding the reins?" "That is Confucius," replied Tzu Lu. "Is it Confucius of the Lu state?" "Yes." "Then surely he is the man to know where the ford is." Tzu Lu then questioned Qiani. Qiani said, "Who are you, sir?" "I am Cheng Yu." "Are you a disciple of Confucius of the Lu state?" He replied, "I am." "The whole empire," said Qiani, "is rushing headlong to destruction, and who is there that will reform it? As for you, instead of following a man who withdraws from prince after prince in succession, would it not be better to follow a man who has withdrawn from the world altogether?" And he went on hoeing without a pause. Tzu Lu went back and reported these remarks, whereupon the master looked surprised and said, "We cannot join the company of birds and beasts. If I am not to associate with these men of the ruling class, with whom am I to associate? If right principles prevailed in the empire, then indeed there would be no need for me to reform it." Shusun Wushu, speaking to the ministers at court, said, "Tzu Kung is a greater sage than Confucius." Tzu Fu Qingpo repeated this to Tzu Kung, who said, "Let me use the simile of a house surrounded by a wall. My wall rises only to the height of a man's shoulders, so that anyone can look over and see the excellence of the building within. But my master's wall is many fathoms in height, so that one who fails to find the gate of entry cannot see the beauties of the temple, nor the rich apparel of the officiating priests. It may be that only a few will succeed in finding the gate. Need we then be surprised at His Excellency's remark. Shu Sun Wushu was disparaging Confucius. Tzu Kung said, "It is no good. Confucius is proof against detraction. The wisdom of other men is like hills and mountain peaks, which, however high, can still be scaled. But Confucius is like the sun or the moon, which can never be reached by the foot of man. A man may want to cut himself off from their light, but what harm will that do to the sun or the moon? It only shows very plainly that he has no notion of the measurement of capacity." Sayings of the Disciples. Yu Tzu said, "It is seldom that good sons and brothers are given to insubordinate conduct. That those who dislike insubordinate conduct should be ready to foment sedition is something absolutely unknown. The wise man attends to the root. For if this be properly set, virtue will spring from it. And what is the root of all goodness but filial piety and fraternal love?" Cheng Tzu said, "There are 3 points on which I daily examine myself. Have I been conscientious in working for others? Have I been truthful in my intercourse with my friends? Have I practiced what I preach?" Tzu Sia said, "The man who can appreciate moral worth and disengage his mind from sensual passion, who can put forth his utmost strength to serve his parents and lay down his life to serve his prince, who speaks sincerely in his intercourse with friends. Such a man, though the world may call him untaught, has, in my opinion, received the best and highest education." Tzu Kung said, "What do you say of the poor man who refuses to flatter, and of the rich man who is free from pride?" "They are well enough," replied the master. "But better still is the poor man who is cheerful, and the rich man who cherishes the inner principle of harmony and self-control." Tzu Kung said, "One must cut and then carve, chisel, and then polish, as the odes have it. Does not this passage illustrate what you say?" The master exclaimed, "Here is somebody at last with whom I can really discuss the odes. Refer him to any old verse, and he will see its application." Tzu Sia asked, saying, "What is the meaning of the passage? What dimples in her witching smile? What lovely eyes, clear white and black. Simplicity sets off her ornaments." The master replied, "You must have a plain background before you can lay on the colours. Rules of ceremony then require a background." "Ah!" exclaimed the master. "Shang always seizes my drift. Here, at any rate, is someone with whom I can discuss the odes." Tzu Yu said, "Too much fault-finding with princes entails disgrace. With friends, it brings estrangement." The master wanted to employ Qi Tiao Kai in the business of government, but the latter said, "No, I cannot yet sufficiently trust myself." The master was pleased with the reply. Once, when Yen Yuan and Qi Lu were standing by, the master said, "Come, tell me, each of you, the wish of your hearts." Tzu Lu said, "I should like to have carriages and horses and fine fur garments, and share them with my friends, nor would I mind if they were worn out in this way." Yen Yuan said, "My wish is to make no parade of goodness, and no display of toilsome service rendered." Tzu Lu then said, "I should like, sir, to hear your own wishes." The master said, "To comfort the aged, to win the confidence of my friends, to love and cherish the young." The master said, "Jung might well be made a prince." Chung Kung asked a question about Tsu Sang Potsu. The master replied, "He is a good man on the whole, though easygoing." Chung Kung rejoined, "Is it not excusable for a man who is strict in his own habits to be easygoing in dealing with the people under him? But if he becomes easygoing in his own habits, as well as in his practice abroad. This is surely too much of a good thing. The master said, Jung's words are true. Jian Yu asked, Is our master for or against the Prince of Wei? Oh, said Tukung, I will ask him that. He went in and said, What sort of men were Po Ai and Shu Qi? They were two ancient worthies, was the reply. Did they ever repine? He asked. They made perfect virtue their aim, and they attained it. Why then should they repine? Tukung went out again and said, Our master is not for the prince. Cheng Tzu said, Ability asking instruction of incompetence, abundance sitting at the feet of insufficiency. A man of every virtue who thought he had none, solid in character yet making himself out a cipher, trespassed against, but never retaliating. Such was the humble state of mind in which my late friend spent his life. Cheng Tzu said, If a man can safely be entrusted with the care of a young orphan prince, or with the government of a large province, and if the approach of a great emergency cannot shake his resolution, is he not a man of the princely type? Of the princely type he is indeed. The authorities of Lu were proposing to reconstruct the Long Treasury. Min Tzu Chien said, Why not restore it rather in the ancient style? Why is it necessary to renovate it altogether? The master said, This man is no talker, but when he does speak, he speaks to the purpose. Su Manu lamenting said, All other men have brothers, I alone have none. Tzu Xia said to him, I have heard it said that life and death are divine dispensations, that wealth and rank depend on the will of God. The higher type of man is unfailingly attentive to his own conduct and shows respect and true courtesy to others. Thus all within the 4 seas are his brethren. How then should he grieve at having no brothers? Chi Tzu Cheng said, The higher type of man is possessed of solid qualities, and that is all. What has he to do with the ornamental? Tzu Kung replied, I am sorry, sir, to hear you say such a thing about the higher type of man, for a 4-horse chariot cannot overtake the spoken word. The value of the ornament and the value of the substance are closely connected. Stripped of hair, the hide of a tiger or a leopard is very like the hide of a dog or a sheep. Duke Ai asked Yuzhou, saying, It has been a year of famine. My exchequer is low. What am I to do? Yuzhou replied, Why not collect tithes? Why, said the Duke, with a tax of 2/10 I still have not enough. How am I to make 1/10 do? If the people have plenty, was the reply, how can the prince alone be in want? But if the people are in want, how can the prince alone have plenty? Cheng Tzu said of the higher type of man that his culture tended to bring him into communion with friends, and his friendships tended to heighten his altruism. The disciples of Tzu Xia asked Tzu Chang about the principles which should govern friendship. Tzu Chang said, What is Tzu Xia's opinion? They replied, Tzu Xia says, Associate with those who come up to your standard. Reject all those who do not. This, said Tzu Chang, is different from what I have been taught. The nobler sort of man honours the virtuous and wise, but he admits to his society all men without distinction. He admires the good, but he also pities the weaker brethren. Am I a man of great wisdom and goodness? Then who is there among my fellow men that I will not bear with? Or am I neither wise nor good? Then other men will reject me. How can one justify this rejection of others? Tzu Xia said, The inferior type of man always tries to gloss over his faults. Tzu Xia said, The wise man will gain the confidence of the people before laying burdens upon them. Otherwise, they will consider it oppression. He will gain the confidence of his sovereign before censuring his actions. Otherwise, the latter will consider it mere libel and abuse. Tzu said, "He who does not transgress the larger principles of virtuous conduct may be excused for disregarding the boundary line in matters of smaller import." Tzu said, "The followers and disciples of Tzu are trained well enough in sprinkling and sweeping the floor, in responding and answering questions, in entering and leaving a room. But these are mere accessories. Of fundamentals, they are totally ignorant." How can this be considered enough? Tzu, hearing of these remarks, said, Yen Yu is mistaken. It is not the way of the wise teacher to distinguish between subjects of first-class importance, which must be taught, and subjects of secondary importance, which may be neglected. He cultivates minds, just as he would cultivate plants, each species requiring separate treatment. It cannot be the wise man's way to produce confusion and error. He only is inspired who teaches methodically, having a beginning and an end. Tzu said, "Let the official who has time to spare devote it to study. Let the student who has time to spare devote it to public affairs." Tzu said, "The rites of mourning should not extend beyond the expression of heartfelt grief." The chief of the Meng family having appointed Yang Fu to be criminal judge, the latter went to Tseng Tzu for advice. Tseng Tzu said, "Our rulers have lost their way, and the people have long been scattered and distracted. When you discover the facts of a crime, be not moved with joy, but rather with pity and grief." Tzu Kung said, "The mistakes of a great and good man are like eclipses of the sun and moon. His failing is seen by all, and when he repairs it, all look up to him with awe.